No matter how self-assured we are, in a fraction of a second, our lives can be utterly devastated. As in the biblical story of Jonah, the unknowable forces of trauma and loss can swallow us whole, thrusting us deep into their cold, dark belly. Entrapped, yet lost, we become hopelessly frozen by terror and helplessness. Early in the year 2005, I walked out of my house into a balmy Southern California morning. The gentle warmth and soft breeze, whoa. Okay. Forward, up, there we go. Okay. Warmth and soft breeze gave a lift to my step. Certainly, this was the kind of winter morning that makes everyone in the rest of the country, with the possible exception of Garrison Keillor, and maybe you folks here who like to shovel snow, want to abandon their snow shovels and move to the Southland's warm, sunny beaches. It was the beginning of a perfect kind of day, a day when you feel certain that nothing can go wrong, that nothing bad can possibly happen. But it did. I walked along, absorbed in happy anticipation of being with my dear friend Butch for the celebration of his 60th birthday. I stepped out into a crosswalk. The next moment, paralyzed and numb, I'm lying on the road, unable to move or breathe. I can't figure out what has just happened. How did I get here? Out of a swirling fog of confusion and disbelief, a crowd rushes towards me. They stop aghast. Abruptly, they hover over me in a tightening circle, their staring faces fixed on my limp and twisted body. From my helpless perspective, they appear like a flock of carnivorous ravens swooping down on an injured prey, me. Slowly, I orient myself and identify the real attacker. As in an old-fashioned flashbulb photo, I see a beige car looming over me with its teeth-like grille and shattered windshield. The door suddenly jerks open. A wide-eyed teenager bursts out. She stares at me in dazed horror. In a strange way, I both know and don't know what has just happened. This is also very characteristic in working with trauma. The person knows it, knows what happened, but then a moment later, they don't know it. Part of it is due to switching of state dependencies, but I think it's a deeper mechanism than that. As the fragments begin to converge, they convey a horrible reality. I must have been hit by this car as I entered the crosswalk. In confused disbelief, I sink back into a hazy twilight. I find that I am unable to think clearly or to will myself awake from this nightmare. Then just after that, shortly after that, a man came along and announced himself as an off-duty paramedic. And so I started to orient, just the way Ray was starting to orient to where the blast was occurring. But then he barked at me, "Don't move your head, your neck is broken." And at that moment, exactly, just sensing what you're sensing, letting it move through, I dislocated from my body. It was as though, no, it was looking down on the scene, seeing the paramedic, seeing the twisted body. You see this with traumatized people, particularly with early trauma. It's like they're watching somebody else and they may feel neutral or sad, but it's not them. Well, I got a taste of my own medicine, so to speak, and really experiencing dissociation. And that's not a good place to be in after a trauma like that, because that's a very high predictor of developing PTSD. So thankfully, a few minutes later, a woman came by and she kneeled down and she said, "I'm a doctor. Actually, I'm a pediatrician." And I remember thinking, oh God, that's exactly the right kind of doctor I need. And she asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yes, please stay with me." And she took my hand in hers, held my hand, and she said, Nothing. But the touch of her hand and the smell of her perfume just went in, and I knew that even in this darkness, I wasn't alone. There was somebody there. There was an anchor, a protector. Again, you see that function is often lost with early trauma, the protector function. And with that contact, I was able to come back into my body, feel the numbness, feel the beginning of trembling and shaking, the shaking and trembling beginning, coming in waves. Then I felt as though my left hand wanted to come up, was to protect my head, which it did apparently. Otherwise, my head would have cracked the windshield, not my hand. And then, again with my right hand, again with waves of shaking and trembling, spontaneous breaths. We'll talk about more about that sequence tomorrow for sure. And I felt this red rage wanting to kill the girl, but I could feel that again moving through my body. And the paramedic had taken my pulse and my heart rate. My pulse was about 150, I think, and my blood pressure was higher than that. It was about 180. But that's not that unusual for, being in an accident like that. And so then in the ambulance, the paramedic was taking my vital signs there, and she did it, and she did it again, and she did it again, and I said, "Is there anything wrong?" And she said, "Well, actually, I can't give you this information. I can only give that to a doctor." So what I did is said, "Well, half-truth, I am a doctor." Didn't say what kind. And she said, "Well, something's wrong because your pulse is 72 or 74, I think, and your blood pressure is 120 over 70. And I said to her and to me, "Thank goodness I'm not going to be traumatized."